When Robb Stark marched south as king in the north, his greatest weakness was isolation. He had victories on the battlefield, but no secure path to the Iron Throne, and the Lannisters remained too powerful. But imagine if instead of seeking aid from the Freys or relying on wavering bannermen, Robb made common cause with Stannis Baratheon. Stannis, the elder brother of King Robert, believed himself the rightful heir, and, unlike Renly, he would have respected Robb's claim to independence. Their alliance would not be one of equals in title, but one of shared purpose: destroy the Lannisters, end the usurpation, and reshape the realm. Such an agreement would be born of practicality rather than affection. Stannis had no love for the North, but he was pragmatic, and Robb's army could provide the numbers and mobility he lacked. In return, Stannis's fleet and Melisandre's mysterious power could offset Robb's strategic disadvantages. The pact might be sealed at Dragonstone, where Catelyn Stark, still desperately seeking allies, could negotiate terms. Robb would declare independence for the North and Riverlands, and Stannis, focused on the Iron Throne, would acknowledge it. In return, Robb would bend his military might toward Lannister defeat. Their combined strength would alter the war's direction. With Stannis's fleet guarding Blackwater Bay, King's Landing would stand vulnerable in a way Tywin could not easily counter. Robb, instead of chasing Tywin's armies aimlessly, would coordinate attacks with Stannis's disciplined legions. The Riverlands would be secured, and Lannister supply lines strained beyond endurance. Even the Tyrells, ambitious as ever, might hesitate to back the losing side if two kings pressed against Lannister power, but such an alliance would not be without friction. Stannis's rigid sense of justice clashed with Robb's more flexible honor. Melisandre's presence, her red god, her prophecies, her shadowy sorcery would unsettle the Stark lords. Men like Great John Umber would distrust her completely, while Catelyn would fear what bargains Robb was forced into. Yet Robb himself, driven by duty to his bannermen and the memory of his father, would swallow those doubts. His cause demanded victory, not purity. At Blackwater, the battle would play out differently. With Robb's men pressing Tywin in the west, Tywin could not ride to King's Landing in time. Stannis's fleet, bolstered by Stark scouts and intelligence, would prepare for wildfire more cautiously. The fiery trap might still inflict losses, but the sheer weight of combined Stark and Baratheon numbers would overwhelm the defenders. Joffrey would fall into Stannis's custody, Cersei cornered within the Red Keep. The Lannister dream of supremacy would shatter in fire and steel. In this alternate tale, Robb's war would shift from a doomed struggle for survival into a campaign of triumph, reshaping the balance of wet. Yet with victory would come new questions. Could the young wolf trust the stern king who bowed to no one? Would Melisandre's whispers poison the pact? And most dangerously, how long could two kings truly share the spoils of war without turning upon each other? With King's Landing fallen, the alliance between Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon entered its most fragile phase. The Lannisters were broken, Cersei imprisoned, Joffrey a captive, and Tyrion's political cunning silenced without the hand's power behind him. Yet victory did not bring unity. Stannis seated himself upon the Iron Throne, grim and unyielding, while Robb's envoys demanded recognition of the North and Riverlands as free kingdoms. The hall echoed with tense silence as lords whispered of two kings in one realm. Stannis, ever bound by law, honored his pact in words but not in spirit. He declared Robb the king in the North, yet his manner made it clear he considered such independence temporary, a concession until the war is done. Robb, young and proud, bristled at the half-promise, but he held his tongue. His men had bled for this victory, and the chance to secure peace for the north could not be squandered by impatience. Catelyn reminded her son that haste had cost his father dearly, and to tread carefully. Meanwhile, Melisandre's influence grew. She proclaimed the fall of the Lannisters as the will of her god, and the lords of the south listened with unease. Northern bannermen, stubborn in their own faith, mocked her fire rituals in whispers. Yet her visions gave Stannis confidence that his war was divinely sanctioned. She spoke of another enemy beyond the wall, a darkness rising in the frozen wastes. Robb, though skeptical, remembered his direwolf's restless growls and his half-brother Jon Snow's letters from the Night's Watch warning of strange shadows in the far north. In the west, the Tyrells faced ruin. Their gamble on Joffrey had collapsed, and with Loras grieving for his brother Renly, bitterness hardened their hearts. But Margaery Tyrell was clever. She sent quiet feelers toward both Robb and Stannis, offering wealth, grain, and knights in exchange for a new marriage. Pact. Stannis dismissed her with disdain, unwilling to entangle himself with scheming roses. Robb, however, could not ignore the prospect. The Freys still demanded he fulfill his promise to wed one of their daughters, and Walder Frey's temper was no secret. To set aside that betrothal for an alliance with Highgarden would bring strength, but also betrayal. While politics simmered in King's Landing, war still raged elsewhere. Balon Greyjoy pressed his claim, raiding the north with brutal speed. Robb longed to march home, to defend his people. But Stannis demanded his armies remain in the south to crush the remnants of Lannister loyalists. Tension flared. The Great Jon roared that the north should not bleed for southern quarrels, while Davos Seaworth quietly urged Stannis to honor Robb's need. In the end, Robb dispatched a portion of his host under Roose Bolton to retake the north, a decision that would shape the fates of many. Even as alliances shifted, the Iron Throne stood under a new banner. No longer did the Lion of Lannister roar from the Red Keep, but the Stag of Baratheon, and beside it, in banners carried proudly. Through the capital, the direwolf of Stark flew as an equal partner. The small folk whispered of two kings, one of fire and iron, one of ice, and honor standing together. But shadows lingered. For as much as they had crushed their common foe, neither Robb nor Stannis could escape the truth. There was room for only one king in the hearts of men, and sooner or later the wolf and the stag would clash. The uneasy peace between Robb and Stannis soon began to fracture. Though their banners flew side by side, every council meeting became a battle of wills. Stannis demanded strict obedience from all lords of the realm, declaring that his word was law as the rightful king. Robb, young but unyielding, reminded him that the North had bent the knee to no southern monarch since Torrhen Stark. Their arguments echoed through the halls of the Red Keep, and though they did not yet draw swords against one another, their men could feel the cracks widening in the north. Trouble deepened. Roose Bolton, entrusted with leading men against the Ironborn, wove schemes in secret. His ambition thrived in the absence of his king, and he whispered promises to the Freys that the Starks had spurned them for southern gain. Walder Frey's outrage, stoked by Bolton's subtle lies, festered into something darker. The seeds of betrayal took root even as Robb's eyes remained fixed on southern politics. Meanwhile, Melisandre pressed her visions upon Stannis. She spoke of a darkness beyond the wall, of an enemy far greater than Lannisters or Greyjoys. Stannis listened with grim patience, but Robb grew restless. His heart pulled northward, toward his family, toward Winterfell, which smouldered under the Greyjoys' occupation. He urged Stannis to march with him to reclaim the north, but the Baratheon king refused. "The Iron Throne first," Stannis said, "then the rest." Robb knew his bannermen would not forgive endless delays. At court, new dangers emerged. With Cersei imprisoned and Joffrey disgraced, whispers spread of Tyrion's fate. Some claimed he had escaped the city, others that he languished in the dungeons. If alive, his mind could still unravel plots that no sword could solve. The Tyrells, smarting from defeat, turned their gaze northward. Lady Olenna counselled her granddaughter Margaery to seek opportunity, and soon letters arrived for Robb offering her hand in marriage. The thought of uniting Stark and Tyrell blood was tempting. Grain for the north, knights for the war, but it would mean forsaking his oath to Walder Frey entirely. Robb hesitated, torn between the honor that bound him and the survival of his people beyond politics. The realm stirred uneasily under the weight of two kings. The Riverlords feared that Stannis would eventually seek to reclaim their allegiance for the Iron Throne, while Northern lords muttered that Robb should return home before his people forgot his face. Davos Seaworth alone saw the storm clearly. He counselled his king that breaking faith with Robb would destroy everything they had won. But Stannis' patience for compromise grew thin. As the year turned colder, ravens came from the wall. Jon Snow, now rising in the Night's Watch, spoke of wildlings gathering under a king beyond the wall, of ancient threats stirring in the frozen dark. Robb read his brother's words with unease. Yet in the south, such warnings were dismissed as northern fancies. Melisandre, however, nodded with fire in her eyes. She claimed the true war was not of thrones, but of survival, and in her gaze Robb saw both a warning and a promise. For now, the wolf and the stag remained bound, but every passing day strained the chain that held them. Their victory had brought them power, but also choices that could tear their fragile pact apart. And in the shadows, betrayal and ruin crept closer, waiting for the moment when loyalty faltered. Winter was creeping south, and with it the weight of decisions neither king could escape. Robb longed to march home, to reclaim Winterfell and drive out the Greyjoys, but Stannis refused to weaken their hold on the south. The Iron Throne was his obsession, and every resource had to be bent toward securing it. Their counsels grew sharper, their words colder, until even their bannermen whispered whether the alliance would hold another season. In the north, the war festered. Roose Bolton's treachery ripened as he courted Frey resentment. Walder Frey's fury burned hot over Robb's broken betrothal, for word had spread that the young wolf was considering a Tyrell marriage. Though no wedding had yet been pledged, the insult was enough to turn the Freys into bitter enemies. Bolton fed the fire, promising the Freys that the North would bow only to those ruthless enough to take it. Yet none of this reached Robb's ears in the south, where politics and pride blinded him. Stannis, meanwhile, demanded the Riverlords swear direct fealty to him rather than through Robb. This insulted the Stark cause deeply. Men like Lord Blackwood and Lord Tully had bled for Robb's banners, not Stannis's. They muttered that their loyalty was to the king in the north, not to some southern monarch draped in fire and shadow. Davos tried to soothe tempers, but fanned the flames, warning Stannis that Robb's pride was a danger to destiny. It was Jon Snow's letters that struck Robb hardest. Reports of wildlings gathering under Mance Rayder, of the dead walking, of horrors in the snow, these words gnawed at him. His bannermen pressed him. What good is a crown if the north itself burns? Yet Stannis dismissed the letters as tales to distract them from their true war. Robb began to wonder if his oath to Stannis had blinded him to the greater duty of protecting his homeland. The Tyrells seized the moment. Olenna whispered through envoys that if Robb would marry Margaery, they would send food and soldiers north to defend against the Ironborn and any greater threat that came. Robb felt the weight of that choice more than any sword. To take Margaery's hand would be to betray the Freys and weaken his already fraying alliance with Stannis. Yet to refuse might leave the north starving, broken by raiders and winter both. In King's Landing, the common folk began to see the cracks. They had hailed the fall of Joffrey and the Lannisters as salvation, but two kings ruling uneasily brought only uncertainty. Some prayed to the Seven, some to the Lord of Light, some even whispered of the old gods in the north, yet all feared. That peace was an illusion, and that soon enough, fire and ice would clash in the very heart of the realm. For Robb the choice loomed: remain bound to Stannis and risk his people's ruin, or break the pact and return north, no matter the cost. Each raven, each counsel, each night haunted him with the same truth: wolves cannot be caged forever. The alliance between Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon had begun to feel more like a chain than a bond. Robb's bannermen grew restless, their loyalty strained by long marshes in the south, while their homes burned under Greyjoy raids. Letters from the north told of Winterfell in ruins, of Bran and Rickon missing, and of the Dreadfort tightening its grip. The Great John thundered that their king must ride north, while Lady Catelyn pleaded with her son not to abandon the fragile alliance. Every voice pulled Robb in two directions, and each day he felt the weight of the crown heavier on his head. As ever, saw only the Iron Throne. He pressed for more oaths, demanding the River Lords and Storm Lords kneel directly to him. To Stannis, Robb's title was a convenience useful for now, but destined to fade when order was restored. Robb's pride flared at every slight, yet he restrained himself. His men had spilled too much blood to see the pact collapse over words. Still, when Stannis spoke of the boy king of the north, Robb's hands clenched, his sword's hilt beneath the council table. The Tyrells, watching with sharp eyes, saw the cracks and pressed harder. Margaery's letters promised not just soldiers and grain, but a new alliance that could shift the balance. If Robb married her, he would bind the fertile south to the cold north, ensuring his people's survival through winter. But in the shadows of the twins, Walder Frey sharpened his vengeance, nursing the insult of a broken betrothal. Bolton's whispers fanned that fury, setting the stage for betrayal. Meanwhile, Jon Snow's letters grew more dire. He wrote of Mance, raider uniting thousands of wildlings, of dead things stalking the forests, of a storm greater than all their wars. Robb believed him, yet Stannis dismissed it. The Night's Watch exaggerates. The true war is here, for the realm itself. Robb felt torn. His brother's words stirred something in him, a sense that his duty stretched farther than crowns or alliances. Ghostly omens and the howls of grey wind only deepened his unease. The small folk whispered uneasily in King's Landing. They had seen lions toppled and stags rise, yet now they watched wolves walk among them. To them, to kings meant only more war. Fires of the Red God burned in the streets, while northern soldiers carved faces of werewoods into the city's trees. Faiths clashed quietly, each side certain their God was the true one. The city simmered, ready to boil. At last, Robb gathered his closest lords. He confessed he could no longer ignore the plight of his people. He would return north, with or without Stannis' blessing, Some urged caution, others cheered the decision, but all knew the cost. Breaking away might spark open war with Lady Catelyn begged him to think carefully, for once the wolf left the stag, there would be no turning back. Robb made his choice. He would march north. Winterfell called to him, and the North's survival outweighed every pact, every crown. Yet, as his banners prepared to turn, shadow and fire watched from the Red Keep. Melisandre's eyes burned with knowing, and Stannis' jaw hardened with grim resolve. The wolf might think to slip free, but the stag would not release him without a fight. Robb Stark's decision to march north rippled like thunder through the realm. His bannermen rejoiced, for at last their king would return to defend their homes. The river lords too breathed easier, knowing their families would no longer bleed for southern ambitions. Yet in King's Landing, the news struck like a blow. Stannis, Baratheon, stern and unbending, received it as betrayal. "A king does not abandon the war unfinished," he said, his voice as cold as the steel crown on his brow. To him, Robb's departure was desertion, proof that two kings could never truly share one victory. Davos, Seaworth, urged patience, reminding Stannis of their pact and the blood the North had shed for his cause. "Let him go," Davos said quietly. "The wolf fights for his den, as is his right. Better an ally in the North than an enemy in the field." But Melisandre's voice was fire against his calm. She declared that the boy king was a rival to destiny, that his path would one day lead to defiance. "One king must burn for the other to rise," she whispered. Stannis listened in silence, his eyes dark with thought. Robb prepared his march. With speed, knowing each day Winterfell suffered was a wound to his heart. Letters came from the Dreadfort, cloaked in courtesy but filled with veiled threats. Bolton promised aid against the Greyjoys, but his loyalty was smoke hiding daggers. Catelyn sensed the danger, yet Robb trusted too much in oaths. "Roose has fought for me before," he said. "He will not turn." Her silence was heavy, filled with a mother's dread. The phrase, meanwhile, seethed openly. Envoys from the twins brought insults instead of courtesy, demanding explanation for the broken betrothal. Robb offered none. He was too proud, too focused on his march north. Walder Frey's anger boiled into vengeance, and in the quiet halls of the twins, he began to plan what history would remember as treachery cloaked in guest-right. In the south, the realm trembled. The Tyrells, ever opportunistic, pressed themselves closer to Stannis now that Robb was leaving. Alina whispered that with the wolf gone, the rose might bloom beside the stag. But Margaery's eyes still turned northward, for she knew the Stark cause carried honor the Iron Throne could never match. As Robb rode out of King's Landing, with his banners streaming behind him, the people watched in silence. Some saw salvation in his departure, others saw doom. Too many, it was proof that the realm was breaking, each lord seeking only his own crown. Yet for Robb, the path was clear. The North first, always. Behind him, Stannis remained in the capital, his fist clenched. Around the Iron Throne, already, his mind turned toward the day when Wolf and Stag would meet again not as allies, but as rivals. Melisandre's fires promised it, Davos feared it, and in the halls of power, lords began to whisper of the war that was yet to come. Robb's march north was long and heavy, but his men carried it out with renewed purpose. At last, they were returning to defend their families, their keeps, and the bones of their ancestors. Along the way, they saw the scars left by the war villages, burned by Lannister raiders, towns stripped bare by marching armies, and rivers running black with ash. Yet every step closer to Winterfell strengthened their resolve. The direwolf banners rose high, a sign that the North was not broken, only waiting for its king. But shadows followed them. Roose Bolton, cloaked in courtesy as ever, rode at the head of his men with calm detachment. His letters to Robb had promised loyalty, but his secret messages to the Freys promised betrayal. Walder Frey had found in Bolton a willing partner, and together they plotted to strike when the wolf was most vulnerable. Robb remained blind to their scheming, trusting in old oaths and underestimating the venom of insulted pride. In the North itself, the Greyjoys grew reckless. Theon Greyjoy, desperate to prove his worth, held Winterfell in fragile hands, but rebellion within and the shadow of the Dreadfort undermined him. The North's people hated the Kraken, and they prayed for the day Robb would return to drive the Ironborn into the sea. Ravens brought grim tidings of famine and despair. Winter was tightening its grip, and the North starved while its king fought far away. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Stannis tightened his hold on the Iron Throne. His rule was stern, his justice relentless. Tywin Lannister, wounded by defeat, retreated west to lick his wounds, but the lion was not yet slain. In the Reach, the Tyrells considered their next move, playing both sides as only they could. Melisandre's fire burned bright in the capital, her prophecies speaking of a night yet to come when only her chosen king would stand against the dark. Yet whispers of Robb's march north spread even there, sowing doubt among southern lords who wondered whether the wolf would one day return to challenge the stag. Robb himself wrestled with choices. He thought often of Jon Snow's warnings from the Wall of Wildlings, massing and dead things walking. Some nights he dreamed of icy winds and shadows with blue eyes, and grey wind growled at unseen threats. Robb feared the true war was not for thrones, but for survival. Still, his duty was clear: reclaim the North, restore Winterfell, and prepare his people for what lay ahead. Catelyn, riding at his side, saw the danger building. She begged her son to tread carefully, to remember that not all smiles hid loyalty. Do not trust too easily, she warned. But Robb, weary of doubt, pressed on. He believed his honor and victories would keep his men true. He did not yet see how betrayal grows strongest in the shadows of triumph. The North awaited him with open arms, but also with knives hidden in the dark. For even as Robb rode home to reclaim his kingdom, the trap of the Red Wedding was being woven in silence, its threads pulled by Frey, spite, and Bolton cunning. The young wolf thought himself free at last, but his greatest trial was still ahead. Robb Stark rode into the North with the pride of a king returning to his people. The sight of his banners brought hope to villagers long starved and harried, and men flocked to his cause, eager to see the direwolf reclaim Winterfell. Yet even as the North stirred to life, the seeds of betrayal were already sown. Walder Frey, bitter and spiteful, offered peace in the form of a wedding feast. He promised that old wrongs could be mended if Robb's uncle Edmure would marry one of his daughters. Desperate to secure the crossing of the twins and mend the insult of broken vows, Robb agreed. It was a decision that would lead him astray, into a snare. At the twins, the feast began with music, meat, and wine. The hall rang with laughter, though it was hollow and strained. Catelyn Stark's unease grew with every passing moment, her eyes sharp as she watched Frey's smiles stretch. Too thin, Bolton sat quiet, his face unreadable, his eyes cold as ever. The songs played on, but beneath them lingered silence, like the stillness before a storm. Then came the moment that history would never forget. The doors slammed shut, the music turned. To a dirge and crossbows were raised from the shadows. Screams split the hall as fray men fell upon their guests. The young wolf fought with fury, grey wind howling outside the gates, but treachery weighed heavier than swords. Arrows struck, blades cut, and loyal men fell by the dozens. Catelyn, with despair in her voice, begged for her son's life, yet no mercy could be found in Walder Frey's heart. Roose Bolton dealt the final betrayal, driving steel into Robb's chest with the cold words, "The Lannisters send their regards." The king in the north staggered, blood staining his cloak, and the dream of a free north died with him on that floor. Catelyn's scream echoed as her own life was taken, and with them perished not only a family but a cause. The Red Wedding became a wound that the North would never forget, a scar carved by fire, treachery, and blood far to the south. Stannis Baratheon remained on the Iron Throne, but even he could not escape the shadow of the act. The Freys had delivered him victory he had not asked for, cutting down his ally and leaving the wolf's crown in ashes. Yet the deed stained all who had conspired in it, for the North remembered, and vengeance brewed colder than winter. Melisandre spoke of destiny fulfilled, but Davos muttered that such victory was built on rot, and rot would never last. And beyond kings, crowns, and betrayals, the true threat gathered in silence. Jon Snow's warnings were no longer whispers, but truth carried on icy winds. Dead things walked, the wildlings massed, and the wall stood as the last shield against the storm. But with Robb Stark slain and the North shattered, who would unite? The realm, when the night finally fell, thus ended the tale of wolf and stag, allied briefly triumphant, but undone by pride, politics, and treachery. For in Westeros, victories are fleeting, and the Game of Thrones spares no king for long.